Hi, I'm Anita Walker, Executive Director of the Mass Cultural Council, and welcome to our Culture Chat today. I am so delighted that our guest is Emily Ruddock. Emily is, as you know, the Director of MassCreative, our great partner in advocacy for the arts and cultural sector here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And Emily, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Anita.
So first, before we get started in our conversation, we've done maybe 8 or 10 of these so far. And one of the things that I am trying to do is wrestle control of Zoom and have it work for me. I am a bit of a victim of technology. I'm learning how to use it. So I am going to challenge the people who are joining us in the conversation, and I know there are a few who are signing on as we go along here, to do something in the course of our conversation, because I think one of Emily's main objectives in life is to get our field to do something around advocacy. So we're going to be talking for about a half an hour, and down at the bottom of your screen there is a little thing that says Q&A, and I really would like everybody to just take a minute during the course of the conversation to send in a comment, send in a question, share a story about an experience you had with a legislator, good, bad, or indifferent, what worked, what didn't work, what could help things work better. So I'm going to say that early. I'm going to say that often. And I want this chat Zoom to exceed the number of comments we had in our last one. And we had 5. So let's do better than that. Okay, great. As many of you probably know, Mass Cultural Council has been really trying to take the temperature and do little dipstick surveys into how the field is faring during the coronavirus. While we try to keep these chats upbeat, I think it would be a mistake not to at least mention the results of our latest survey that just came out yesterday. We've had nearly 700 organizations respond to 2 surveys, and not surprising, but still shocking. More than $250 million of revenues lost by these organizations just since the coronavirus hit, and 15,000 jobs affected with layoffs, furloughs, and cuts in pay. Emily has been a terrific partner and continues to be in our work around advocacy to make sure the cultural sector is front and center and central in any kind of mitigation funding, in any kind of stimulus funding, and in a recovery plan for our entire economy and for people. So Emily, can you talk a little bit about what MassCreative's been doing around this?
Sure. Thanks, Anita. And I also, that the release of that information yesterday is sobering, and it took me a sit to recover. And then I was reminded about why MassCreative exists and what has been so tremendous to see happen in the creative sector over the last number of years. So let me sort of start talking a little bit about what we've done since, the middle of March. So as we sort of witnessed the state begin to, and Governor Baker start putting in place really smart public health recommendations and then mandates to keep us all safe, we realized that it was going to impact the creative community, and that's organizations and people. And so we started thinking about, well, what are the things that we're going to need to make sure we're advocating for? So obviously money is a piece of that, but we're also thinking about housing. What's it going to take to make sure that people who've just lost their jobs are going to be able to access unemployment, are going to be able to get some relief, get a little bit of a pause on having to pay rent? What are the things that we can advocate for that will help keep our sector whole through this? So we did our research. That's one of the things that I actually really love, is I started looking across the nation at what other states were doing that were maybe about a week or 2 ahead of us in this pandemic, and put together some policy recommendations. And then we had a lot of conversations. So we've had conversations with you and your staff about how you were so quickly and efficiently turning around dollars and directing them towards relief efforts to the creative sector. And that helped us sort of think about, well, what are the other pieces that we need to be advocating for? And, you know, the way that we're seeing this shake out is it's really the top down. So the federal government, I guess now it's almost 4 weeks ago, it'll be 4 weeks ago yesterday, signed the third piece of COVID-19 related relief funds into law, and that was the CARES Act. And that was the first one where we really saw opportunity for organizations and people within the creative sector to access support. So that included dollars through the Small Business Administration in terms of that Payroll Protection Act and the Economic Injury Disaster Loans. It also made a provision for unemployment assistance for contract workers, 1099 workers who have, I feel very confident in saying this. That's the first time that contract workers have been included in the unemployment safety net in the unemployment's history. That's a huge deal, right? And then money was allocated to the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and IMLS, which is the Institute for Museums and Science and Libraries. And so that whole package of money represented about, I believe it's like about $300 million of relief towards that the creative community could access, all told. And so what we now know is, so we're seeing how that's implemented. And I am reminded of one of my favorite professors in grad school that policy is one thing, the implementation of it is quite another, right? And we are all sort of dealing with that. But we're seeing how that's filling in where that is helping people in the Commonwealth. And so we also are pretty sure that our leaders on the state level were waiting and are looking to see what the feds are doing and then thinking about how they can fill in the gaps, right? So, I think we saw on the state level really quickly, the governor and the legislative leadership put together some incredibly meaningful packages of money to take care of our first responders and our frontline health workers. And then they've been working pretty steadily in work groups to start thinking about how are we going to respond to this? How are we going to recover to this? And with that sort of that piece of the equation, right? The feds have to share what they're going to do, and then the state can put that together. And all along the way, we've been working to make sure that we're sharing that information with all of you. I think part of MassCreative's job is not to be the only voice up at the Statehouse. Our job is to make sure that we can help interpret policy decisions into action. So that's what we've been doing.
Very busy. Everybody has been so very busy. And I'm just going to take a pause on that note, Emily, because I think it's really important while we talk about the strategies and the agenda and so on and so forth, that we remember that we're all real people that are working on this in really difficult circumstances. I have been surrounded by these books. They're real. They're real. I feel like for weeks and weeks, and I haven't had time to read any of them. They feel like a prop, and I love to read books. And I know that a lot of our organizations and a lot of people on this Zoom meeting have really found that connecting with staff and each other is just absolutely essential. Talk a little bit about how you're doing that at MassCreative.
Sure. So, one of the things that keeps me going, right, we're working in crisis, right? This is not normal times. And so I think we all are looking for these moments where we can go, okay, this is what's keeping me moving forward. Is I think about and reflect on the advocacy work we've all done together in the past, right? So, we at MassCreative believe very strongly that part of our work is helping people understand their power within advocacy. So not only do you have a right, you have the responsibility to let your elected officials know what you care about, and to make sure that they are educated on the issues and are making decisions that are in the best interest of all of us in the Commonwealth. And so, we put out, so the day that the Mass Cultural Council put out the first report about that survey information, we put together a little action alert. And so this is our attempt to make it really easy to understand the issue and take action. So we put out a link, you click on it. I'm sure many of us have done this, and it gives you sort of a pre-populated form email that you can hopefully personalize. And so we sent that out on March 23rd. We have had 576 messages sent into 133 members of the legislature. And here's the fact that I really love. 45% of those messages came from first-time senders. So obviously, of that group, many of them have reached out to their legislators before, but 45% of those messages were first-time people working through our system. So that for us is really great to see that, like, oh, our message is getting out, more people are getting activated and thinking about that. And those messages didn't have a, you need to vote on this or give us more money. It was, I want to tell you my story. You know, you just got all of this data, these numbers about the impact, but I want you to know what's happening in my town or with my organization or with my Main Street. And just so you all know, I have, you know, through our system, we're able to see what those messages are. And reading some of those makes me feel, frankly, so much better, because there are so many articulate people who are passionate about this and are ready to stand up and share their stories.
Emily, I know that I invited people who are joining us today to share their stories, and Susan Navarre has already written in. She did right off the bat. Thank you, Susan. And she writes, my best experience was at a Statehouse exhibition. Our rep greeted us and welcomed me into his office. The artist and some of her subjects were there and were thrilled to see themselves represented at the Statehouse. I'm trying to reproduce that experience now with frequent contacts with my state reps.
Yes, Susan, gold star Susan. Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, right? Like, our reps and our state senators, it is just as easily to see them in the Statehouse as see them at, you know, the local CVS or the Dunkin' Donuts, right? They're real people, and they are in the business of wanting to represent their constituents. So this isn't, you know, this is great that it's about, and what I love, Susan, that you're talking about is it's a longer sustained relationship. It's, you know, it's not just asking for something, but it's checking in and saying, like, hey, just want to let you know this is happening, or thank you for your hard work in this moment. Those messages matter, and that relationship building is key to all of this work.
You know, I have a feeling that there may be some of our constituents, obviously a lot are really responding to your action alerts, but I think people feel like, oh, and I've had people say this to me, this is a crisis, this is an emergency. I mean, where is my legislator? I don't even know if they're able to go to the Statehouse. Should I be interrupting them when they're dealing with this crisis? Talk a little bit about that issue.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So no, the Statehouse closed, the building is closed to the public, right? And the legislature, in an attempt to keep themselves safe, is doing some really smart social distancing protocols. So sessions are still happening. We have a year-round legislative session, but they are informal sessions, which means there's very few members of either chamber in that session. For those of you who have Rep. Donato as your representative, he has been amazing, and there have been a couple of articles written about how he's keeping the sort of the business going on the session. So thank you, Rep. Donato. But that doesn't mean your legislators aren't working and they're not answering or communicating. So email probably is the best route at this moment, right? The phones are probably not going to get answered quite as quickly. They will get answered. I think one of the great things is behind every rep or state senator is an unbelievable staff who is keeping tabs and keeping up with communication. And I think that a well-timed message is always appreciated. So, you know, one of the things that we've been thinking about, right, is so there's pre-COVID-19 and COVID-19. And, you know, before COVID-19 hit, MassCreative was working on a couple of bills that we still feel very passionately about, but the timing of them has changed, and the relevancy has changed, right? So this is probably not the time to call in and say, hey, I've been thinking about a whole new program that we should maybe create tomorrow that doesn't address COVID-19, right? I think keeping your communications sort of focused on what's happening and what you need as a creative leader or a creative in our space, cultural leader, is really meaningful and really helpful.
We've talked quite a bit about advocacy at the Statehouse, but a lot of the stimulus, a lot of the financial resources so far have been coming from the federal government, from Washington, D.C. And just this morning, we did hear that the SBA money is expended. It's out. So obviously, we need more. We need more help from the federal government. States need more help. How can our constituents participate in that conversation at the federal level?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm going to put in the chat box a little section of our website that includes, it's a little long, but I promise you there are lots of hyperlinks to make it easier, but I'm going to put particularly the take action area. And in it includes a number of asks around the feds, right? Around what's happening at the federal level. So, so there's, the Americans for the Arts is a national organization that advocates for the arts and cultural sector. Then there's also the Association of Science and Technology Centers, and then there's the National Humanities Alliance. And all of those agencies are working to make sure that they are connecting their constituents and us with the members of Congress. So you'll see in the, when you get to that page, there are 3 different hyperlinks that'll take you to some direct actions you can take around around those issues. So I think one of the things that I'm so delighted to say is that in our congressional delegation, we have an amazing set of senators and representatives who get this and who are working really hard to make sure that relief is headed our way and that the creative sector is included in that. I think Representative McGovern, who represents sort of the central part of the state, has been a longtime champion of the creative sector and is someone who is really open to hearing what the need is right now and having that inform his work. We also have the chair of Ways and Means on the House side, Congressman Neal, who's the Berkshires. And, we know the absolute devastation that COVID-19 has meant for the creative community out in the Berkshires. He's a great person to reach out and talk to, and to talk to his staff about this issue if you haven't already. The other piece is that the money, the money that was included in the CARES Act was basically, the bet was it would cover through June. So A, we're in trouble that it hasn't already, and B, I am an optimist, and I want to say that they knew that things weren't going to go back to normal in June. So they're sort of doing this in sections, which is why we're all pretty confident that a 4th stimulus bill is being developed. Now, what the timing of that is and what will be included in that is a really important moment of advocacy, right? I think that I was reading a report the other day along the lines about the payment protection program, that there's one camp that wants to just give an extension for that and monies for that. There's another camp that wants the next bill to include that, as well as money to states and local municipalities, right? And so we know that the creative sector is supported by all of those bodies, and advocating for funds for all of those is really important.
So I want to remind other people who are joining us and being part of this conversation to just click on that little Q&A box and share your experiences with advocacy. Have any of you actually reached out to a member of the congressional delegation before, and how did that go? How was your experience? And what recommendations or ideas do you have around that? And while you're thinking about those comments and questions, Emily, one of the comments that or questions that I get a lot, especially I've had a lot of inquiries through the news media because of the survey results that we've been publicizing. And the question is, what is the state going to do in terms of a stimulus fund for the arts and culture? Can you speak to the conversations you're picking up on Beacon Hill around the potential for that?
Yeah, and I think, Anita, we agreed to keep this as a positive conversation. So unfortunately, this is the piece that may not feel quite so positive. So on Tuesday, the chairs of Ways and Means, Chair Roderick's on the Senate side, and then Chair Michaelwitz on the House side, and the Secretary of Administration and Finance, Secretary Heffernan, hosted an economic impact roundtable. So representatives from a number of nonpartisan think tanks, the state treasurers, Treasurer Goldberg, all gave reports. And then I don't think this is going to come as a surprise. The news isn't great, right? So state revenues have gone down dramatically. And one of the confounding factors is that because we're dealing with an ongoing public health crisis, there's no way to sort of say, on this date, things are going to rebound up. So they spoke with a lot of caution, which I appreciate, and I love when economists do that. But it's clear that on the state level, the legislative leadership is trying to figure out how to move this forward responsibly and to include as much of a relief package overall as they can with limited funds. So, and this goes back to a point you made earlier about, is it okay for me to reach out? We're in the middle of a public health crisis. It's really important that you reach out. And, our sector provides unbelievable service to the residents of Massachusetts. And I think creativity and the ability to express one's creativity, the ability to access the public science information that places like the Museum of Science or the Ecotarium have. These are all incredibly important parts of what make Massachusetts. And so, we need to make sure that we are advocating, just like the restaurant industry or the education space are advocating to make sure that all of us can see ourselves reflected in relief packages that are put together. I wish I had a timeline of when we expect to see that that stimulus roll out. I just don't. And, as soon as I do, I will tell everyone. But, I think that's the thing that I'm watching is I'm watching incredible moments of leadership on the state level of people taking this really seriously and wanting to do what's right. Can I mention one other piece of this that actually has to do with the question of money? So, it's census time, or as I like to call it, the greatest data collection effort our nation does, right? And so every 10 years, we are asked to participate in a census by law that helps to not only think about legislative districts, but really thinks about and helps us understand and helps the federal government understand just how many people are in each state and municipality. And that's the information they use when they are making decisions around allocating costs or allocating funds. So Anita, and you can tell me immediately if I'm wrong, but I talked a bit about in the CARES Act, there was $75 million allocated to the National Endowment for the Arts. 40% of that money went to state arts agencies like the Mass Cultural Council and regional arts agencies like NEFA. The formula for how much money the Mass Cultural Council got is in part based on census data, right? Because they're saying like, okay, how much per capita should we try to carve out? So this is incredibly important information for us all to do. Take the census. In a moment of panic 2 weeks ago, I took a pause and a 15-minute break and took the census. It was great. My family is now registered. And then the other piece is as communicators, as connectors, creative connectors. I think there's also another responsibility here that I think is linked to advocacy, which is making sure that we are helping to encourage everyone to take the census, to make sure that we can demystify really incorrect assumptions about what the census data is going to be used for or how it's going to be misused, and really encourage, if we are working in a nonprofit organization that's serving a community, encouraging that community to participate in the census. So I'm going to put a link to Mass Counts, because one of the things that I love is on their homepage, there's a button right front that says volunteer for some phone banking. And that's an action of advocacy. We're all under very stressed moments, but if you need a refresher or need to take a pause and set aside sort of your work, phone banking and making sure that people have accurate information about what the census means and encouraging them to take the census is incredibly meaningful. So I really encourage everyone to do that for sector selfish reasons, and then also for a larger civic responsibility reason.
And your conversation with someone who's sheltering in place at home. So it's kind of like a triple win. Definitely worth the time to do it. And one other thing I would say, thank you for bringing up the census, Emily, is it's not just about how much money comes into Massachusetts to support the arts and culture, but every single federal dollar that comes in to build roads and bridges, to support education, to support all of the things that we need, relieves the state revenue from having to be addressed in that way. And that, again, makes the pie bigger for everybody. So we have about 4 minutes left, and I'm still waiting for one more person beyond our wonderful Susan. Just type us a little note, please. I'm begging now. But Emily, aside from the census, which I think is really spot on in terms of the long-term impact, and by the way, it's for 10 years. So you're making an action that's going to have a lifespan of 10 years, and that's a big deal. What are some of the top 3 tips that you can say that people in our field can do right now, thinking about right here in Massachusetts, and how we can really make sure that our cultural life can be sustained beyond this crisis?
Okay, my top 3 tips. Number 1, sign up for, make sure that you're signed up for the MassCreative mailing list. We send out regular updates and regular action alerts. And what we try to do is make it as easy as possible to engage and to know what's happening. So I would encourage you to do that. And then I would encourage you to take the action when we ask you to take the action. I would also encourage you to, this is sort of simple, but look up and know who your representatives are. That's both on the federal level as well as the state level. And check out their websites. Follow them on social media. You can find out so much through that simple act of following them on social media. And then the third one is tell your story. And you can tell your story in a bunch of ways. You can tell your story by reaching out to a legislator and telling them what's happening. You can tell your story by participating in the data collection and surveys that the Mass Cultural Council is putting together. That is really important information to help fill out and to help us advocate. In fact, I'm using those numbers all the time when I'm talking to legislators or talking to decision makers. And then, so those are the 3. I also want to just make a little plug. So tomorrow will start our very first policy and advocacy update webinar. I know it's a webinar, another one, but this one, I promise, it's only 15 minutes. It is top line information and top line actions to take. So I'm going to put in the chat box the very long link to sign up for tomorrow's webinar, but it will happen every Friday, and what feedback we get from that will inform how we are continuing to update and share.
And Emily, I do want you to know you gave 3 great tips, including storytelling, but I just learned something in real time, and that is the effectiveness of begging, because Ann Fellheimer actually did send in a comment specifically because I begged. She says, okay, I'm sending you a note so you can have another comment. Thanks for doing this conversation. Museum worker here and a member of the Holyoke Local Cultural Council. Looking forward to conversations with museum folks as well. And Anne, tomorrow we do have a museum folk. Carol Charnow from the Boston Children's Museum will be with us, sharing how they are still staying connected with our youngest among us throughout this crisis.
Anita, Anne's comment also reminds me that, you know, a lot of the focus of our conversation today was on federal and statewide advocacy, but there's another group of decision makers to talk to and to make sure that they are educated on what's happening. And those are our municipal leaders. So in some towns, it's your mayor or your city manager or a city council or a board of select persons. All of those people need to know what's happening and advocating. And I think one of the things that's been amazing is to see how the local cultural councils across the Commonwealth, I had the privilege of joining a conversation yesterday, have really worked to take care of their creative communities. And then those are groups that you could reach out to and see how they're doing their advocacy and educating their the city leadership about this.
Well, Emily, I want to thank you so much for taking time over our little culture chat today. And thank you, Anne and Susan, for jumping right in there and participating with us. Advocacy is every day. It's not just during the budget season. It's in good times and bad. And we have stories every day to tell. So let's make sure that we're sending them to the people who can really use them and help make a difference for our field. Emily, thank you very much. Thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you tomorrow on Culture Chat. Bye-bye.
Thanks. See you.